My Gavanamelodin, which means well met, my friend, for those of you who are new to my channel. And I still get emails like, well, what does that actually mean? It's the Sindarin Elvish language that is used in Lord of the Rings in the movies. And it is more of like the modern Elvish. And it just means well met today. So it's a simple greeting, my Gavanin. I want to do another video on the mirrors of reality. And one of the things that I have known about myths, legends, and fairy tales that Tolkien actually expresses as well is that they mirror a part of all of us that is closer to the true pure spirit. And a lot of times our fairy tales really teach us about nature and the connection to nature. And so to me, it is a glimpse of our true selves. For those of you who have not seen this running theme in my channel, what I have realized is that the ego serves a great purpose to us, but it is our false self in the idea that it is our identity, it's our surface identity, and it is true in the idea of what we create and what we become based on our environment and how we mold ourselves, and it's our mask that we wear out in the world. But our true selves are our souls, and that is something that hides a little bit in this world. And the reason is so that we can keep on playing the game of life. To be able to experience life, you have to be able to put yourself fully into it. When you are in touch with your pure spirit, you get a glimpse of your true desires, your true soul, your true wants and needs, and things that are fulfilling spiritually to you, rather than maybe the surface needs and the things that are fulfilling for you on the surface, which is what your ego deals with. The ego is not bad at all. We need the ego as well as the soul, the super consciousness within us. And so together that creates the experience, but at times they are at battles with one another. I believe that the ego represents the parts of us that want to stay asleep and wants to experience the life that we want and doesn't want to look at some of the higher spiritual consequences of our actions and our choices. But when you get in touch with some of the truths within fairy tales, legends, and myths, and if you're someone like me that really relates well to that side of life, what those legends and those fairy tales that you read about and all the myths in the world, and whether they're creation myths, whether they're just fairy tales and folklore, they'll somehow ring true to you. They will reflect a true part of your soul. And that is what this movie, Legend, does for me. And I know that it does for a lot of other people because it's one of the cult favorites. Directed by Ridley Scott, the same man who did the whole series on aliens. He did this amazing movie called Legend, which came out in 1985. Now, he is the director, but the writer is actually William Hortzberg, and he was the one who actually wrote the script for Legend because Ridley Scott basically said that he wanted to do a fairy tale that was a little bit of a darker nature. He read the Brothers Grimm tales, and he was really into the fairy tales and wanted to combine all of those major elements together and come up with a story. Disney actually did not want it because it was too dark for them. And so he was the one who actually did it on his own, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it because of some of the dark themes. Well, of course, you have the princess, and you have the brave warrior, and then you have the devil. Which is funny because if you watch Fantasia, this creature here kind of reminds me very much of that devil character in Fantasia. But I guess Disney just didn't want to go to that place. But to me, it's their loss because it was a beautiful movie. But in a way, I'm glad that they didn't take it over because I believe that Ridley Scott put a lot of really beautiful, magical elements to it. And I love Disney, but I also feel that this gave it some of this like raw quality that really reflected the fairy tales of, you know, all the different Grimm brothers and the Hans Christian Andersen type of fairy tales, where it's not so much kind of this imagined version of fairyland where everything is all full of light and love, but that there are creatures that have different intentions and they have different wills of their own. And so he shows that within his realm of fairy, because there is fairyland in this movie. It is a wonderful movie because it shows how the different dimensions and realms actually coexist with this earth. So you have these two characters who are living in Earth, and this character here, which is played by Tom Cruise when he was young and innocent, and I just love the effects of keeping him very, very feral. And he was known as like a forest child. He grew up in the forest. Not quite an elf, but he was definitely one that seemed to communicate with the animals, and he learned the ways of nature. And so he was very, very close to being an elf. But there are actually elves in here, not the elves of Tolkien, but more like the elves of the ancient fairy tales of the Irish and even the German legends as well. So it's really a wonderful movie about fairyland and about how it coincides with Earth. And it shows the division between kind of the human world and the nature world. But what happens is nature will accept you. The elemental spirits and all those nature spirits will accept humans into their realm when they are aware of nature and they themselves connect to nature. This character Jack has the ability to actually communicate to animals. He speaks rabbit, he speaks finch, he speaks fox. He speaks the actual languages of each particular animal. Wonderful idea centered around that I feel is very, very true in the idea that nature does respect you when humans can respect it. And you can see that in the way that, nature responds to us here on the planet Earth. So this was a great movie with a lot of wonderful themes that actually reflected the true reality that really does exist. And you just have to think about it a little deeper, or you have to get in touch with that part of your soul that is not so much connected to the ego, but is connected to a greater part that we are all connected to. And the way that I see myths, legends, and fairy tales, and even Tolkien stories connected to us is very much in the metaphor of the idea of the tree. So if you take a great big tree and you look at all the tree roots underneath the soil, all those tree roots actually connect to other trees. A forest is not actually just a tree alone with its roots, but it's an actual whole root system. So even though there are things that look separate, you may think, well, Tolkien wrote a book and it was separate, it was coming from his imagination, but one thing you have to remember is that we're all interconnected. So each of us actually mirror a part of our own mind. And that's really how we're all mirrors to each other. Tolkien was a mirror to all of us because of the way that he wrote a storyline that would actually connect to our pure spirit rather than really please our egos. And yes, sometimes your egos can be pleased by these stories, especially if your ego starts to kind of intertwine with your soul and there's not so much of a division between the two, and your ego actually starts to actually show your soul on the surface and express truly who you are rather than who you want to be or who you are expected to be by society standards, why you're trying to fit in, and the mask that you wear. But when someone expresses their true soul, and I guess this is why I don't really care the way that I express myself anymore, is because I believe that that is really us putting our soul out into the open to do what we need to do on earth, to be that part, that important spark of the divine that we all each are. And when we hide that and we don't really express all that we really truly are, then you are going to limit the amount of reflection of the true reality that is here on earth for everyone to see. So the way that I see it is that if everyone expresses themselves as who they really are on the inside, with, of course, some wisdom behind it and some ideas that when you express yourself, there's going to be consequences. So choose the best way to express yourself that will give you the benefits of having a peaceful and a joyful life, because you're being true and authentic to yourself. And it's really not coming from any kind of masked desires that are trying to kind of hide some other emotions going on in your world. But anyway, that is why I feel that all legends, myths, and fairy tales, just like J.R.R. Tolkien suggested, does mirror our reality. And when you just first glance at a movie or you first glance at a story, you may think, oh, well, that's just in the realms of imagination. Yes, but what is the realms of imagination? The realms of imagination exist so that you can create from them. And I believe that we're all in a process of getting to know our true selves and what actually lies deep within the self, so that when we are in the world and we are faced with the ego, we can discern between what our true soul really wants and what the ego wants just to fit into society, to feel like they want to belong, rather than what actually really is wanted by the soul and desired. I do feel that a lot of people go unhappy in this world because they really don't express what they truly want in their life, and they really don't really move from the soul, but rather they move from what society expects of them, what their family expects of them. And this character, Jack, represents that freedom. He is a human, but he's a forest child that lives in the forest, and he represents that part of us that just walks away from society and really doesn't want to kind of placate to society, and really just does his own thing. He lives in the forest with these animals. It's a beautiful character development within him. And then you have Princess Lily. Princess Lily is also a character that runs away from her castle because she doesn't want to do what's expected of her as a princess, but she actually wants to stay with the ordinary folk that live in this beautiful land near a forest, and she finds it magical, more magical, she says, than actually all the castles that she knows of. She goes into a woods cutter cabin, and this woman, she creates these beautiful ornate cuckoo clocks, and Lily says, there's no prince that can carve wood like this, and that to me is so magical, and she loves being around that. And so you could see that she's looking to go beyond what society will give her in the idea of power and status and, being popular on the surface. But the funny thing about society, and the funny thing when you think about that idea, is that when you strip down to the individual within that society of expectations, then you get to the soul of each individual. Well, what do they truly want to see in society? What do they truly want? Do they really want castles to represent humans in that way, where you have, the king and you have the court and everything, and you have to follow the rules and the laws, and you're held back in a lot of ways? Does each individual soul really want that? So, to me, the ego almost represents the unconscious collective that's playing a story that kind of follows each other blindly into what society wants. And then you have your soul, your individual soul that everybody has. And when they're in touch with that, that is the truth. That is their pure essence coming through. And that's what these stories and movies do for humans. And that is really why I think that legend is a favorite among other types of movies like this. So I wanted to go through a couple of themes that I found that were the mirrors of reality for us. So the idea of the unicorn as our theme. Now think about it. In the Bible, there actually is a verse about the unicorns, that the unicorn was supposed to go onto the ark, and it was a sign of purity and a sign of a time when mankind wasn't as corrupted. So the unicorn has always had that type of representation within the world. The unicorn is, I believe, a creature that did exist and does exist on other planets and in other realms and other dimensions, and especially fairy. And the story is that the unicorn, as long as it exists on Earth, it protects all that's good in the world. Not that not bad things will happen, but that darkness can never take over completely, and that there will always be light. And so there's this balance of the devil and of the angelic energy or the light energy. And of course, the devil, being the devil, wants to basically dominate everything and turn everything into void and darkness. That's a major theme in a lot of stories, that the devil character doesn't just want to kind of take over and rule, but actually they want to end the universe. They want to end all creation. They symbolize complete destruction and eternal darkness a lot of times. And that's what he wants to do. So when he gets rid of the unicorn, well, then he can have his eternal darkness. Interesting thing about this character is that he has minions that are goblins. And the goblins even say to the fairies within this story, we are brothers, we're one, but I went a different path because I was in search of adventure, and it's a long story. And so what you learn is that when you actually pay attention to the minions of the devil, the goblins don't even want eternal darkness. And if they had a chance, they want to take the power for themselves. They just want to be worshipped as divine beings, and they don't want eternal darkness. And there's a quote actually in the director's cut DVD where the goblin says, well, not even darkness can last forever. Meaning that he is more about fire and mischievousness and, causing destruction, but not the void of darkness, which is what he actually represents. And what Melkor actually represents in Tolkien stories as well. In the Silmarillion, you learn that Melkor doesn't just want to rule, he wants to put everything into darkness like himself. That is a theme that runs very, very deep within fairy tales and legends about darkness versus light. The darkness wishes to always plunge everything into darkness like itself. It can be reflected in the people that are in your life or people that you may meet that are in darkness themselves. And so when they're in darkness themselves and they're in pain, they want other people in darkness and in pain. So that's really what this character usually always reflects in our own reality, is that when you have a character like this, this is a symbol for the darkness within ourselves and the darkness within others that wants company, that doesn't want to necessarily control or rule over others. They don't want that responsibility of making you their slave. They just want you to be where they are. And that's purely a selfish place, and it's not a good place at all. But it is also an indication that love is there, in the idea that it's a lack of love, it's a feeling of wanting love, because companionship and feeling connected to others is a sense of love. And so when you get towards the end, you have this character that represents the devil that actually says, well, we are one, we're brothers, we are eternal, you can never get rid of me. And that theme really runs very true in this world. We are never going to have a world of complete utopia. I have a vision that maybe in the very last moments of humanity we could, but I believe that there's always a struggle between the darkness and the light, the good and the evil, because it represents the balance in this universe. Without the dark, you wouldn't have the light. Without the light, you wouldn't have the dark. I don't want a universe without darkness. I just want a world experience with souls coming to terms with the darkness within themselves, and that in turn will elevate the experience for others, because then they will be aware of the darkness within themselves. They will not want to cause the darkness, and they will bring more light to the world. More light to this world will change this world in a big way. And I believe that that's where we're heading. And I just want to constantly be a reminder about doing that so we can move there together. But the devil represents actually a being that wants everything in darkness and in void and wants to control everything. So there's a lot of wonderful themes between the dark and the light, but then the idea about balance. And there's another movie that I'll talk about with balance, and I seem to really like those movies the best because I am not a tyrant. I do not want the light to take over everything and never ever have any kind of darkness. Part of the experience is understanding and getting to recognize the light, having those beautiful moments of understanding what is the light when you're also looking at the darkness. And that's really what this major theme is that you cannot get rid of darkness, but you will constantly battle darkness. You will always have to know that there is a balance of dark and light that does exist. And it's about you choosing what side you want to be on. As you see with a character, a little goblin that wants to help the fairies escape, he says, well, it was my mistake because I was out looking for adventure, I was looking for something, and I found the devil instead. So the idea is that when you want to go in search of darkness, well, then that will be your life, that will be your path. If you want to search for the light, that will be your path. It's about experience. It's about personal experience and a true realization about their soul. They usually realize, well, I actually just want to be happy. I just want to have peace. Very interesting theme about balance and good and evil within this that reflects this world as well. And it's not something that lies only in the imagination of children or of adults. Funny thing about fairy tales is all of them are actually created by adults. And it's because the adults are getting in touch with that part of themselves that children are easily in touch with. And some of the religious texts talk about this, that you can come to heaven with the innocence of a child. And innocence is another theme in this movie because it's about the unicorn actually being attracted to innocence. Because innocence is pure intent, pure intention. Innocence. You're clean. Your consciousness is clean. So children come to the world with that. They don't have their egos fully developed because they don't really care about what society thinks about them. They're not trying to fit in. They're just trying to express their truth that is really in the inside of them. And so that's why children are regarded as innocent in a lot of ways. And that innocence is the theme in this script because Lily and Jack are innocent until they learn about the darkness that exists when nature comes out of balance, and when you have a character like that wants to overwhelm the balance and really kind of just throw everything out of balance in the entire universe, which is what he threatens to do. Interesting things about in and out of dimensions. The idea about fairy is actually within Earth. So you have a world on top of another world where the fairies can poke in and out. That's actually how it happens on Earth here as well. Some people are able to actually see the fairies because they do exist in another dimension that is parallel to this world. And so you see that within this story, and you also see evil also existing on another dimension. When you get to the land of where the devil actually lives, you learn that it comes from a great tree that is terrible and scary to look at, which is an interesting reflection about the tree of life. And the idea of when you think about a tree, it's beautiful and full of leaves and everything, but this particular tree is dead, and it really is, it has no leaves to it. And the reason is that Gump, one of the little elf characters, he actually says this was a place of human sacrifice. And this is where the humans went to sacrifice people when there was evil anarchy on Earth. So the idea that humans actually called, I think you see it in the director's, the theater version as well. But there's a lot of like effigies and gods and like images of gods and statues that are around this area. So it shows that it's been a place of sacrifice and worship for a long time. And that kind of called the devil and the goblins into this area. And the devil actually doesn't really live completely on Earth, but the devil comes out of a mirror. And it's just an amazing kind of setting because it really does point to the idea of having different dimensions while being parallel to Earth's, and how these entities poke in and out, whether they have good intentions or whether they have ill. They are all connected to human action. The humans that connect to the fairies will be the ones that are connected to nature, and they will draw that energy to them. And Jack becomes a great friend of the fairies because they see his pure intention towards nature and wanting to connect to the animals, and they see that he has no ill intention towards nature, so they make friends with him. But then you see that the goblins and the little devils and the devil himself, they reside in this area where there was great human sacrifice being done at a time when there was evil rulership and tyranny on Earth. So, very important themes about good and evil and how they reflect our human nature as well, and how different entities and different spirits are called to us when humans act a certain way. Evil begets evil, and good begets good. And that is really just a very logical way of looking at things, that your consequences will come to you in the form of calling on different types of spirits and energies into your life. So I really like this movie because of that idea about the sacredness of nature and connecting to it. And the other type of theme that was very interesting to see in here was that the devil was actually talking to a power above him. And he would also call on the father of darkness or the mother of darkness. And I just thought that that left so much to the imagination to think, well, if the devil is that character, then there's something beyond. And you see at the end, the devil goes back into the universe and, blips into, tiny fragments of its essence, but it moves on to something else because it's never really gone. But it's a servant for another type of power in the universe. Whatever it is, the devil is serving it. And I just thought that that was such a deep and brilliant idea, because that's kind of how we have to start to see the devil in this world, is that the devil is not the end-all be-all, but it actually is a metaphor, or it's a servant for a power that exists within the universe that everyone can get in touch with and connected to when they go down the wrong path and they make these kind of choices that really harm others, and they become seduced by the dark side. Speaking about seduction of the dark side, I know that I said in my other video that darkness is not sexy, it's not seductive. That's me trying to show that there's a reality about darkness in this world that we need to look at in not a form of cartoons or fantasy elements, but that real darkness is not seductive, it's not sexy, and we shouldn't really romanticize it as we have been doing so much. And I think that that caused to a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, they feel very drawn to that darkness because it's romanticized. It looks seductive and attractive. But in this movie, you actually see that theme playing out. The devil actually tries to seduce the Princess Lily using materialism and beautiful jewels, and also he uses love. He says, well, I love you, and I've been looking for a queen to sit on my throne for all eternity with me. And at first she's like, well, I kind of want love. I'm looking for love. Maybe that's the answer. And so you see the seductiveness of the dark side that I think that Ridley Scott was trying to kind of send the message across, like, be careful with your heart. Know who you're giving your heart to. Just because someone offers you love by just words, be careful about it and really go with your intuition and what your true soul is really looking for. The other thing is, I loved the way that the characters were portrayed as the fairies, because The fairy energy in here is very, very right on in the idea about how there's lots of different types of fairies. You have the Seelie court, you have the Unseelie court. The Unseelie court are those fairies that are manipulative and dark, and they want to play tricks on humans, and they like to cause problems, and they represent that kind of destructive side of nature, and that's what they represent in the fairy tales and the folklores of old. And the Seelie court are the fairies that actually want to help humans. They want to teach humans. They want to share their information and their wisdom about nature. I am a Seelie court elf, if I had to, say what court I am on. But that's the type of energy that you see in this movie, which I really like. The fairies actually don't right away take to Jack until they kind of test him. And they test him with this riddle about nature. Whoever can get this riddle without watching the movie will be able to have one of the DVDs. I will be giving away a director's cut DVD, and so if you think you know the answer to this riddle, then email me at elvenlightpath@hotmail.com and tell me the answer and your address, and I will send you a DVD if you get it right. But the riddle that he asks him is, what is a bell but does not ring, but still makes the angels sing? And I knew it right away, but if you can get it, email me and put riddle in subject, and then I will see if you get it right. And if you do, I will send you a DVD. And so the fairies have that type of energy where you have to be cautious around the fairies. You have to make sure that you do prove yourself as someone that is connected to nature and respects nature. And only until Jack really showed that he could, because they were upset with, of course, Lily touching the unicorn and also causing the unicorn to lose its horn, then the fairies ended up actually being really upset with Lily and Jack. Because the fairies represent also the guardians and the elemental spirits that are trying to guard the unicorns and guard all that's sacred and precious and pure in nature. And so I like that energy within this movie, that the fairies don't just naturally, just instantly become your friends, but you have to prove yourself that you are one of them, or that you're connected to the fairy energy in order for the fairies to actually be one with you and to be your friend. And so you see the elves and you see fairies and there's little gnome creatures. It's so beautifully done. And if you're a big fan with makeup, they do an amazing job with makeup and cosmetics in this movie. It's not CGI, it's not computer generated, it's actually all makeup. And it's just so lovely to see because it looks so real. And the character who played Gump was incredible. He's like this little Puck character of Midnight Summer's Dream. And he was just this little elf. And then you have Una the fairy, beautiful like dancer type of quality to her. And Lily, I think they did a wonderful job with her as a cast. And it's just such a beautifully done movie. I really love it. It came out in 1985. And I saw it as a child, and I just absolutely loved it. And I just always remembered it. And every time I see it as an adult, I just remember how it speaks to my soul. And I know that it speaks to a lot of other people's souls. Last thing I wanted to talk about was the trust in love. Towards the end, when Jack needs to defeat the devil, and you see that, there is a point where he thinks that Lily has been kind of corrupted by the devil and that she is of the dark side now because she acts a certain way. And I don't want to give it too much away because I think that everybody needs to see this movie that's interested in it after I speak about it. And there's this part where Jack is ready to basically kill Lily. And instead, he's asked to trust his heart. Don't look at the outside, but look what's on the inside, and what do you feel on the inside about a person. And that is such a theme that goes on in this world that is such a mirror to our reality, because you may be in love with someone, or you may know someone and nobody else knows them, and you hear all this gossip and rumors about them, or people trying to tell you, oh, that person's no good, don't go with them. But if your intuition is actually telling you this is a good person. I know this person because when they're with me, they act differently. They're not like how they are when they're out with others. Listen to that. The closer you are to being engaged with your intuition and your heart, you can really understand where people are coming from and read their intentions. And so that theme is in this movie where Jack is put up against a decision. Should he kill Lily because he thinks that she's corrupted now? Or should he listen to his heart because he's always loved her and he's always trusted her and he knows her like no one else does? Not even the elf knows her. And so there's that theme that plays out in this movie. And I thought that was so beautifully done because that's exactly how it is in this world. I know personally, with my own relationship, I've had people in my life who questioned my choices, and I followed my heart and I followed my instinct, and I'm glad I did because my husband is a really wonderful person. But if I listened to some people, well, they would have only went on the surface of who he is, and they didn't really get to know his heart, and they don't really know him the way I do. So don't let people around you tell you to not follow your heart. You decide, do I need to follow my heart in this case, or do I need to listen more to my head and make sure that they're in balance with one another? Make sure that you're not just following love just for the sake of love, because Lily almost did that. When the devil said, I would love you and keep you by my side, well, maybe the devil he could be possibly looking for a love to share with someone. Absolutely. But was that beneficial for Lily? Was it actually true love? Or was that a surface type of love that she was being seduced by? And I think that that's where people need to ask themselves, are they being seduced for the right reasons into love, or are they actually not in this relationship for the right reasons? And maybe it's time to actually look at what their true soul that's connected to their intuition really wants and has to say about this person that is in their life. Last theme, when the devil says at the very end, what is light without dark? What are you without me? I am a part of you all. You can never defeat me. I am eternal. We are one. We are brothers. That's what the devil says to Jack. And so, like I was saying before, the idea is that we will never be able to get rid of evil completely or darkness completely, while light and dark exist in balance of one another. But what we can make sure is that each of our personal experiences in our lifetimes is about our own battling the darkness within ourselves and outside of ourselves as well. And when you do that, you can make wiser choices for your own life so that you will have more joy, you will have more love, you will experience more of a lighter version of life rather than being so heavy and full of suffering and pain. One other thing, I wanted to read you something from The Fellowship of the Ring, because I chose to look like this today, because sometimes I go from being a high elf to more of like a forest fairy type of elf. And I feel that those types of archetypes really resonate with me. And so I wanted to read you, because one of the things that I kind of wanted to piggyback on to the other video I did about how if all elves were dark, then this is also another way of actually supporting the idea of saying like, no, I mean, elves have, of course, darkness within them, but they didn't choose to show that. Not all of them, and certainly not in the Third Age when they actually grew up and learned from their mistakes. But I wanted to read you something about elves here so that maybe it can help you get in touch with more of that childlike innocence within yourself. And if you relate to the fairies, express that. Be okay and allow that to come out. Love fantasy. Be one that is into these movies and these books, and don't let society call you a nerd or that you're too weak or you're a baby or you're immature, because the truth of it is that adults that were very mature, very wise, very intelligent wrote these fairy tales. And it's because they were reflecting elements within the world that some people don't want to see. They don't want to look at. But they did it, coming from their heart and wanting to be a service to humanity. Elves have this ability of being both childlike, but then also kind of ancient and wise, and allowing that type of dichotomy to exist within you is completely okay, because that's the elves of Tolkien, and that's why they were not dark, is because they were more childlike in a lot of ways than what mankind was expressed as in the stories. So here is what Sam had to say when he went to Rivendell during the time of the Fellowship of the Ring. "And elves, sir, elves here and elves there, some like kings, terrible and splendid, and some as merry as children. And the music and the singing, not that I have had the time or the heart for much listening since we got here, but I'm getting to know some of the ways of the place." So when you actually look at the context of that, there are some elves that are like kings. They're terrible in their power and they're splendid. And terrible doesn't mean horrible in the way that we would think, but it's more of an idea of like greatness and largeness, like terrible power and greatness. And it would intimidate others because they would think that these elves were so splendid and they were so kingly that they didn't know how to act towards them, especially little hobbits. They were intimidated by the elves. But then there were some elves that were merry as children. So you can have both of that exist within you. And I think that that's what Tolkien was trying to reflect. And that was how he was himself. He was like a big child in a lot of ways. And that's why when you come to this world feeling free enough to express that childlike innocence with you, that wants to see the good in the world, that wants to see the light side in the world, that wants to see the light triumph over the darkness, but creating a balance so that people can live their happy lives out. When you get in touch with that, you are in touch with the child within. And when you can do that, it gives you a lot of wisdom, such as in the lyrics of Loved by the Sun by Tangerine Dream that I did a cover of. At the very end was such a powerful moment for me when I first heard those words. "Sweet songs of youth, the wise, the meeting of all wisdom." The sweet songs of youth, of children, of the innocence and the purity, and the wise, the ancient, old wisdom that is only gotten to through life experience. Those two coming together is the meeting of all wisdom. So, Hannah and Lay for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.